We are all of this month. We are in a series of lessons on women of faith in the book of Genesis. I think it's curious. I don't think it's an accident how often the sermon series meshes with our Sunday school lesson series. But we have a sermon today about women and Jesus listening to women, and here we are. Anyway, today we have we're in that series. We're going to talk about Hagar, which is a really interesting story. Next week you get a real treat. Francis is going to talk about Rebekah, the wife of Isaac and the mother of Jacob and Esau. The main storyline in the book of Genesis is about God's chosen people, the Hebrews. And it's really a family history, the family of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah and Rachel and their handmaidens, Bilhah and Zilpah. And we're going to see all of these women. The story of Ishmael and Hagar and her son Ishmael is the subject of today's lesson, and it kind of can seem like just a side story because they're not in this main family tree that we're going to look at in the other lessons, but it's really not, because the main character in the lesson today and in all of these lessons that we're looking at from these women's point of view is God. God is the primary actor in all of them. So in the struggles and the blessings that Hagar experiences, we see God at work, and we learn more about God's loving nature in this. There's the birthday girl, Nancy. We just mentioned that you have a birthday coming up. The Monday? No?
Mine's in March.
Oh, in March. Okay, well, I feel better. I didn't have it written down. Marilyn said you had one. Anyway, all of these lessons are usually identified with Abraham and Jacob and Isaac and Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob. But we're going to look at all of them from the woman's point of view in these lessons. Last week we had, in conclusion, a verse 21, verse 1, that said, "Now the Lord attended to Sarah, and he had said, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised." Even though that promise was biologically impossible, God did what he said that he would do. And in doing so, he answered the rhetorical question that he asked, is anything too difficult for God? No, of course, nothing is too difficult for God. And that is resoundingly answered in the birth of Isaac, when Abraham is 100 and Sarah is 90 years old. In all of these lessons, we see God's attentiveness and also his provident care for these women. And in all of them, we see God continuing through them to advance his saving purposes for all of mankind. Well, last week, I gave a quick sort of a timeline, and I want to do that again. And I passed out some maps, and I think you can find those again. But this story of Abraham's family starts in Ur. It's in Mesopotamia, and it's way over here on the other side of the desert from the promised land, the Palestine. And he, with his father and his uncle and the son of his already deceased brother, leave Ur, and they travel to Haran, up close to the border of what is now Syria and Turkey. And there, Abraham first receives the promise and the instruction to go. Abraham is told by God, go to a land that I will show you. No other information, no map, no anything. And in a great act of faith, Abraham and Sarah leave. They go and take the nephew Lot with them. They go to the land that's promised Abraham, and he leaves at 75 years of age. The events that we have here in the lesson today are when he's 86 to 100, and while they are in Canaan, a great famine comes, and they go to Egypt. There in Egypt, he's afraid of Pharaoh because Sarah is so beautiful. And sure enough, Pharaoh takes Sarah into the palace. When he realizes the mistake he's made and that it angers God, he gives all these gifts to them. Treasure, livestock, and slaves. And so probably our main character, Hagar, is acquired, she's Egyptian, is acquired in that event. The 15th chapter, God reinforces the covenant that he's made with him and promises him that he will have many descendants. Abraham says, all I've got is this trusted servant Eliezer. Let these descendants come through him. God says, no, you are going to be the father. You yourself will be the father. And we have that great verse, 15th chapter, 6th verse, where it says, then he believed in the Lord, and he, God, reckoned it, Abraham's faith, as righteousness. Believed is from really the same root word from which we get amen. He not only believed, he affirmed his belief in what God had promised him. Paul uses that verse that it was reckoned as righteousness to emphasize belief or faith. James, in his little book, uses the same scripture to reinforce the obedience, the saying amen, and structuring his life in accordance with the promise that is represented in that. Well, next chapter, 16th chapter of Genesis, he's 86 years old. Sarah's 10 years younger. And they sort of take time has passed, and they still believe in the covenant. They still believe in the promise, but they're going to help God out. You know, Ben Franklin may have printed it, but he wasn't the first one to believe that God helps those who help themselves. So Sarah and Abraham decide to help God out, and they use a perfectly acceptable in this culture way of doing that, and that is to use Sarah's handmaiden, Hagar, to have a son on her behalf with Abraham. And that takes place in the 16th chapter, and we're going to read about that in the lesson today. Next chapter, God promises them again, and that was the lesson we had last week, that they will have a son, and it will be Sarah and Abraham's son, Isaac, and he confirms that covenant that God makes with them by circumcising himself, Ishmael, and all of his male servants. 21st chapter, we have the birth of Isaac. 22nd chapter, God says to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Finally he gets the son that God has promised him, and then God says, offer him as a sacrifice to me. Abraham passes that test. He binds Isaac and is prepared to do that. God intervenes by suddenly revealing to him a ram, a sheep that's entrapped in thickets as a substitute, but he shows the degree to which he loves God even more than his own beloved son Isaac, and is devoted to God and obedient to God. After that, Sarah, at the age of 127, dies, and the 25th chapter we get to, we have Abraham taking another wife, Keturah, and he has sons with that wife as well. And then at 175, he, as it says, breathed his last and died. So that's sort of the timeline where we are in here in this history of Abraham. We see great faith that you have to admire. You know, God says go, and he goes. God says, I'm going to do this for you, even though it seems absolutely impossible, and he believes that God will do it. Sarah with him. He's obedient, even to the point of being willing to offer his son Isaac. We see great faith, but we also see human frailties in Abraham and Sarah and in Hagar today, in the lesson today, that makes them very relatable. You can see their humanity. It's not that hard to when they laugh at the mere idea of them in their old age having a child. We can relate to them when they are fearful that Pharaoh will kill Abraham in order to have Sarah when they go to Egypt. We can see the humanity in them when they decide, well, we'll help God out by our own efforts, having a son that will fulfill this promise that God has given us. So it's easy to relate to them, I think. Well, as I say, we're accustomed in looking at this story to think of it as Abraham's story, and the real climax of the story is his willingness to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. It's just the two of them. They're there on their own on the mountaintop, and that's sort of the climax there. But this story that we have today precedes it and could be called the sacrifice of Ishmael. It sort of foreshadows and mirrors that story that will follow. It's easy to overlook Ishmael because he's not in this line of Hebrews, and so we lose track of him to a large degree as we continue through the Old Testament. And it's sort of sandwiched in between the miraculous birth the miraculous birth of Isaac and this climactic willingness to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. But yet, the story of Ishmael is important for us not to pass over too quickly, the Ishmael and Hagar, because it shows God's care and his providence and his love. Like the old hymn says, there's a wideness in God's mercy, the wideness of the sea. God's mercy is not just for this narrow little tribe that becomes a nation. God's mercy is for everybody. God's care and providence is for everybody. He sends his one and only Son incarnate into the world for everybody. For God so loved the whole world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth should not perish. So here in this story, we're going to see that God sees, God hears, and God saves, and he's revealing himself to us and to the Hebrews so that we can believe that John 3:16 that I just quoted. Well, in the timeline of Abraham and Sarah, Abraham is numerous times from the time that he is told to go, and he goes to Canaan. He is numerous times received the recipient of God's promise, what we call the Abrahamic covenant. God promises to make him a great nation, to give him many descendants, to give him land for himself and for those descendants, to give him a great name or an honored name or a legacy, and to bless him and to bless his family so abundantly that the rest of the world will not only witness it, but will benefit in being blessed themselves through him. And ultimately that occurs through his descendant, Jesus of Nazareth. That's the Abrahamic covenant. He receives it several times, and he acts on it all the way through his life. Specifically, God promised children, and children that were born to him, not just through an adopted servant like Eleazar, but through him. As I said, time passes on. They believe this promise. They want this promise desperately to be fulfilled, but they decide they're going to have to help God out a little bit to get it done. And so we have this story that we have about Hagar, where they are attempting to do that. Hagar, as I read this from the background text that we have from the 16th chapter, and then we'll go to the 21st for our real focus picture. Hey, Sandy, come on in. Hagar is easily identified with women down through history, and probably women that we also have known. She's sort of like every woman. She's sort of like Jane Doe. You know, she's every woman that's ever been used or abused. Every woman that has been a faithful wife and then is dumped when her husband decides to get a younger model. You know, she's every woman that worked for an executive, put everything into her career, and then is sort of cast aside as someone new comes along to do the job. She has long been identified with women who were African American slaves in our American history, who were taken to their master's bed but not to his heart. She's sort of representative of foreigners and immigrants, single mothers, those that are poor, oppressed, and vulnerable. And so in the story of Hagar that we have today, we see that God doesn't overlook those that are marginalized, that he's attentive to those. Even though the world may use and abuse them, God cares. He sees, he hears, and he provides. And that's what we have in this story today. Again, I spent a little too much time last week talking about it, but it's easy to sort of be put off by this story and be put off by Abraham and Sarah's response to the situation, because it does incorporate slavery and the inferior status that women held in this time and culture, and we need to make sure that we don't dismiss this story because of those reasons. They're in this time, and even in the time when the narrator puts this story into writing hundreds of years later, slavery is part and parcel of their culture, part and parcel of their society. Very different from our values today, but we can easily extrapolate. Yeah, Francis?
I'm confused because when I was reading through this, Hagar is referred to as a wife.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not think that was the same. I thought she was a concubine.
She is. She's a handmaiden, and that's an interesting story. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to talk about that. That actually was a gracious act on Sarah's part. She is a slave. She's a handmaiden. She is offered by Sarah to Abraham to have a child for Sarah through her. When she does that, she doesn't have to make her a wife. That's a gracious act. She says she gave her to her as a wife. Now, she's a secondary wife, and she has the power not only to do that, she has the power to take it back too.
That's what confused me.
Right, but the difference is a offspring, a son of a wife, even a secondary wife, has rights of inheritance. If she had only been a concubine, the son would not have had inheritance rights. So Sarah is saying, not only is this is my son and he inherits through me, he has inheritance rights from his birth mother. It really is a gracious act that's easy to overlook. Right.
It's the first time I've ever seen her referred to as a wife.
As a wife. Anyway, we don't want to be put off because of our modern sensibilities, and we ought to try to see situations in our current culture with our current mores and ethics that are similar in our day to what the situation that Hagar finds herself in this time 4,000 years ago. So the 16th chapter says, now Sarai and Abram's wife Sarai had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave. As I say, she probably was acquired when they were in Egypt. An Egyptian slave named Hagar. By the way, Hagar is not an Egyptian name. It's a Semitic name. So Abraham must have given her a Semitic name when they acquired her. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Maybe I can build a family for myself. I can have a child through her, is what she's saying. It's an accepted practice. We even have historical records from Mesopotamia that showed that the law was a wife who couldn't have a child could have a child for herself through a handmaiden by offering that way to have descendants for her husband. It preserved her status as the primary wife, and it prevented him from legally being able to take mistresses to do it. So anyway, that is interestingly in law. So what she's doing, she didn't just make it up. This is the culture. This is the practice that would have been common in her time. It goes on to say, Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband, to be his wife. This discussion we just had with Francis there. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress, or maybe another translation is she began to no longer show her the proper respect. Probably is a better term. Then Sarah said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows that she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. What she's saying here is that she's not blaming Abram for sleeping with Hagar. She's saying, you are the head of the clan. You're responsible for making sure everybody follows the rules. And Hagar's not following the rules because she's not showing me the appropriate respect that I should have. So what Sarah's doing is she's just preserving, which would have been perfectly acceptable and understood in the time, she's preserving her position as the primary wife, and to give some grace to Hagar. Barrenness was so shameful, and having children was the primary function of wives, and so she is suddenly the recipient of a new status, not only as a wife, but a new status as being someone who is fertile and can have children for Abraham. And, we've all been there before, we do something, we get some recognition, and we can kind of get the big head. Susie's worried that Charles back there is going to get the big head. A&M won a close game, It happens, we get the big head when we win a big football game or something. Well, she's kind of won the big football game, and she's got the big head, and she doesn't treat Sarah with the proper respect. Her behavior is I guess insolent, is what we'd say. But God is attentive. The 7th verse says, I'm sorry, I skipped a verse. Your slave is in your, so she says, Abraham, you need to take care of this situation. Abraham in the 6th verse says, your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think is best. I don't know whether I'm proud of Abraham for backing Sarah up here, or I'm critical of Abraham for sort of saying, it's not my job. I'm not gonna I'm not going to get in this fight, and he sort of dodges his responsibility to go and talk to Hagar about it. But nonetheless, he leaves it to Sarah, and the verse says, "Then Sarah mistreated Hagar, so she fled from him." She treated her harshly. She corrected her behavior, I guess is what we'd say, but she treated her harshly. We don't know what that means. She beat her or what happened. But the result of it was that Hagar fled. And in fact, looking at the etymology of the words, that may be what Hagar means. It may be from the same root word as to flee or flight. And so she leaves. 7th verse says, "The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert." It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. So God is attentive. God's attentive to Hagar just as he had been attentive to Sarah. God spoke to her here again. Here he does now, and then in our focal passage, he speaks to Hagar again. That's easy for us to kind of overlook. We're used to God, men and women from the New Testament on, having the same access to God and so forth. But in this time and in this culture, this is pretty extraordinary. This is remarkable. God speaks to this woman, this slave, this Egyptian. And so she's almost as is on the same par with Abraham himself. God is concerned for her. He obviously loves her. His love for her goes beyond, God's love and mercy goes beyond just those who see themselves as being chosen. It's true that Hagar has converted from whatever pagan religions they practiced in Egypt to being a believer in the one true God, but still, she's a slave. She's a woman. She's in a culture that easily dismissed her because of that status. But the 7th verse says, "The angel of the Lord found her near the spring at Shur." Shur is on the caravan trail back to Egypt. So apparently she's headed back to Egypt when the Lord intervenes. The 8th verse says, "And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" It's sort of like he said to Adam and Eve, where are you? What are you doing? He knows where she is, but he wants her to answer the question. But what I like about this verse here is God meets her where she is. Not just geographically where she is, but where she is socially. Hagar, a slave of Sarai. She's a slave. He meets her where she is and reveals himself to her. "Where have you come from? Where are you going?" She answers, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she replied. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so that they will be too numerous to count." He gives her basically the same promise that he gave to Abraham and to Sarah, that she's going to have all of these descendants, that she'll be the mother of many tribes. 11th verse, the angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your misery." That's what Ishmael means is he hears, God hears. Abraham would have been responsible for naming this son, but obviously it seems obvious that we can infer that she tells Abraham this story of God's appearance to her, and Abraham believed it because the boy is named Ishmael. 12th verse, the angel is continuing to describe this boy that she's going to have. It says, "He will be a wild donkey of a man," or a wild ass of a man. "His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him," which is not surprising, since he's going to have to go on his own with just his mother and make his own way in the world, in a very hostile world, and he does it successfully. You don't do that by being milquetoast. He's going to have to claw and scrape and fight for everything that he gets. Goes on to say, and he will be in hostility toward all his brothers. This can also, though, be translated that he will be alongside his brothers. You can read this to say that he will be near, alongside, but he won't be with, he won't be among his brothers. There'll be a separation between them, is another acceptable way of translating that. Nonetheless, we do know that there was hostilities in later generations between them. When I first read this, and many times since read it, where it said that Ishmael would be a wild donkey of a man, I thought that was a negative, that was a negative description of him when he reached adulthood. But in studying for this lesson, I've learned that actually was an epithet of praise. That was actually a compliment. It's an onager. The wild donkey of the desert, and the donkey was that this wild kind of a donkey was highly admired by desert people because it was almost untamable. It was not domesticated. It roamed wherever it wanted to, and sort of had its own way and could survive in the desert. So actually, that's a compliment when he says he'll be an onager, a wild donkey of the desert. Well, 13th verse says, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have seen him, the one who sees me. This is what's really remarkable. We're here in the 16th chapter of the Bible. This is the first person who's ever given God a name. This woman, this slave girl, gives a name to God. First person in the Bible to do that. And the name she gives to him is El Roi, God who sees. The first attempt to give a name to God. 14th verse says, and that's why the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. It's still there today between Kadesh and Bered. That name for the well, where she stops there on the road, means a well of the living one who sees me. The well of the living God who sees me is the name that she gives to it. Well, she's obedient to the command of the Lord. She returns to Sarai. 15th verse says, so Sarah bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son that she bore him. Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. I'm going to mention a couple of times, and I don't want to equate to it that it's scripture, but if you look at what's called the Midrash, the Talmud, the Midrash, these are old commentaries. Thousands of rabbis down through the history of the Jewish faith have read scripture, they've commented on it, they've added to it oral tradition, they have analyzed it, probably overanalyzed it, but there's a lot of really interesting insights that we sometimes get from the Talmud and this. Don't get me wrong, it's not scripture, but it has been passed down through thousands of years, and it's, I think, sometimes worth looking at to get a perspective and to help us maybe put a face on people like Hagar. These rabbis present in the Talmud this Egyptian handmaid as having come from the household of Pharaoh, being a lesser princess, so to speak, that in offering Hagar to Abraham, Sarah persuades her to do it, doesn't just command her to do it in the Talmud. The pregnant Hagar does become accustomed to her new status and takes advantage of it. And in the Talmud says she intentionally made Sarah look bad in the other women's eyes. And that's why Sarah reacted as she did. The Midrash tells us that Abraham began to see her not only as a handmaiden, but was fond of her, and so we see Sarah's humiliation at being barren is unabated by the birth of Ishmael. There again, that might be some sympathetic reading of it by these Jewish rabbis of the events. It may be that Hagar didn't see it the same way. We don't really have her perspective there. Well, we see the magnificent faith of Abraham and Sarah, but as time passed, they decided to take matters into their own hands, and by their own effort, by the birth of Ishmael through Hagar, they intend to provide heirs of this promise of God. So let's get to the focal passage that we have today, which is in the 21st chapter, 8 through the 21st verses, the story that we have today. In the intervening time between chapter 16 and 21, Ishmael is born. God appears last week to Abraham and Sarah and says, "You're going to have a son." Abraham again tries to make it easy on God and for God to fulfill His promise in a way that Abraham can understand it. And so he says, "Oh, that Ishmael might live in thy sight." In other words, that's wonderful. Why don't you just let Ishmael, my son, he obviously loves the boy, let him be the heir of this covenant that you've made to us. But beginning in the 8th verse, it says, "The boy, Isaac, grew and stopped nursing. On the day he stopped nursing, Abraham prepared a huge banquet. Sarah saw Hagar's son laughing, the one Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham. So she said to Abraham, 'Send this servant away with her son. This servant's son won't share the inheritance with my son Isaac.'" This translation says that Ishmael was laughing at Isaac. The NIV says mocking, that he was mocking him or teasing him or sort of in a light way persecuting him, sort of teasing him in that way. That may be the sense of what happened, but it can also be translated that he was just laughing at him and laughing with him, like any teenage boy. Ishmael's about 16 years old now. The way a 16-year-old brother would be playing with a 3-year-old little brother. Paul assumes the mocking interpretation. He uses it in an analogy in Galatians. He says, "Brothers and sisters, you are children of the promise, like Isaac. But just as it was then, so it is now also. The one who was conceived the normal way harassed the one who was conceived by the Spirit." In other words, you are children of the faith, and you're being persecuted by people that are not children of the faith. Romans. It is ambiguous, and in the Greek Old Testament that Jesus would have read and that Paul would have read, the Septuagint, it sort of ascribes sinister motives to Ishmael in the way that he was teasing or mocking or laughing at Isaac. But in the Hebrew, there's really no indication of that. In fact, the word they use that he was playing with Isaac is really a pun. It's a play on the word of Isaac's name. Isaac's name means he laughed, and so it's really kind of a play on that. So we don't really know. Maybe this was simply Sarah seeing that having Isaac, the much younger brother, grow up with the older brother was going to form the way Isaac thought of himself and the way Ishmael thought of himself, and for Isaac to be the heir of the covenant, Ishmael had to be separated from him. As the oldest, many people would probably have expected that Ishmael would be Abraham's primary heir and the inheritor of his legacy and God's promise. That may be the case. Or it may be the case that this was just the tipping point. This was just when all of the tensions and jealousies and conflicts between Sarah and Hagar and between the two sons finally came to a head. The time for Abraham to finally choose between the women and choose between the two sons, and he could no longer put it off. We don't know which of those scenarios is really right. By the way, we do have a hint of the attitude that Sarah had, because when she talks to Abraham about it, she says, you have to make this servant and her son go. She doesn't use their name. She doesn't say, you've got to send Hagar and Ishmael away. She doesn't use their name. I think that sometimes it's sort of, another example of this is in the New Testament parable of the prodigal son. The older son won't say, my brother. He says, your son, the one who squandered the wealth, It's easier to hate somebody if you can dehumanize them to the point that they don't even have a name. And that's sort of what we see in the way Sarah talks about what's going on here. Two millennia later, Paul, when he's writing to these Galatians, is intending to rebuke the Galatian converts for drifting back to the idea that they can, by their own self-exertion, earn their righteousness by keeping the Mosaic law. And so he uses this story as an analogy here. And what he is saying is that Ishmael represents the son of earthly effort, human effort. Isaac represents the faith. And so he's saying, because Ishmael is sent away, the law of Moses has been superseded by the grace of God revealed and experienced through his son, Jesus Christ. Anyway, the response to this by Abraham is also interesting. It says in the 11th verse, this upset Abraham terribly because the boy was his son. Some translations say that he was distressed, but some Bible verse translations don't think that even catches the severity of the feelings that Abraham had. He's terribly distressed, but one translation says, but the thing was vastly evil to Abraham because of his son. God speaks to Abraham, do not consider it evil because of your slave woman. All that Sarah says to you, listen to her, because it is through Isaac that heirs will be named to you. So God sides with Sarah. He lets Abraham off the hook, so to speak. And so what Abraham thought was evil, God's saying, no, it's really all part of my plan. Just leave it to me. Yet, the 14th verse says that he sends them off on their own in a pretty hapless way. He sends them off with very little provisions to wander in the desert with very little water and food. I think that when I read this, yeah, Marilyn?
That has always confused me. I thought Ishmael was a small boy. For Abraham to put the boy in her shoulders.
Right.
Now a 16, 17-year-old.
That's right. It's a bad translation.
It really is, because
14. And the reason it's a bad, because he's 16, 17 years old. He didn't, obviously that's not the case. It's a bad translation. What we have to remember is there's no punctuation in the Bible. So there's no punctuation, and so when the better translation, both the King James version and in the NIV, is that the NIV here says it has the right sense. It says, where is it? Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. That's really what happens. When you read it, and I've got more here, but it says Abraham got up early in the morning, and he took bread and water, and he put it on Hagar's shoulders, and he sent her and the child out into the desert to wander. That's really what happens here. It's just that's an unfortunate, I think, translation, the way that it's left there.
Translation that I remember Sunday school lessons with pictures
Would-
of him as an infant.
Exactly. When you have other translations, even as far back as the King James Version and modern ones like the New Living Translation and others that do make sense, But nonetheless, that's the one that was printed in our materials today. Well, so God commanded Abraham against the custom of the day to expel Hagar and her son. Because the line of his family is going to go through Isaac. But I think it's interesting to see here, Ishmael is read out of the covenant that he has with Abraham and his primary line, but he's not written out of the larger promise. He's not written out of the promise that precedes it, the promise God made to all mankind, that he cares about all mankind, and he provides for this son of Abraham too. We're going to have a verse here in a minute where he says God was with the boy. God's with the boy, even though he's not in this covenant tradition of the Hebrews. Well, the 15th and 16th verse go on to say, when the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat herself down about 100 yards away, about as far as you could shoot a bow and arrow. And she said to herself, I don't want to watch the boy die, she said, and she burst into tears. She's in utter despair. They've run out of water. They're in the desert. They're wandering. She is physically grieving. She's suffering to the point of death by dehydration and starvation, but she's also suffering emotionally. She's been cast out. She has no family. She has no community. She has been abandoned by her husband. Her son's been abandoned by his father. And she's spiritually suffering as well. She had received this promise from God, and where is that? What's going to happen? Did God just forget me now after making this promise to me? So she is bereft of safety and community and esteem, and she's helpless. And in this helplessness, she cries out and weeps in grief. The 17th verse then picks up, and it's interesting here. I don't know what this means. If somebody's got a better idea, I'm interested. But it says here that God heard the boy, but then he addresses Hagar. I don't know. I thought about this a lot. I don't know why. But maybe it's because God saw in Hagar greater reservoirs of faith that she could tap into than perhaps this teenage boy had. I don't know. I'm not sure what the answer is. But the 17th verse says, God heard. I think this is interesting. God heard. That's Ishmael. So the first syllables of this 17th verse is Ishmael's name. Sarah won't say his name, but God says his name when he speaks. God heard the boy's cries, and God's messenger called Hagar from heaven and said to her, Hagar, what's wrong? It's kind of you wonder about saying that. What's wrong? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy's cries over there. Get up, pick up the boy, and take him by the hand, because I will make him a great nation. When God opened her eyes and she saw a well, she went over, filled the water flask, and gave the boy a drink. I think it's interesting. God doesn't perform a miracle by suddenly water gushing out of a rock, which he certainly can and does do. All he did was get her in faith to look up. And when she looked up and looked around, there was a well already there. Same thing will happen in the next chapter. When he gets Abraham to look up and look around, the ram's there entangled in the bushes to be a substitute sacrifice instead of Isaac. In all of this, though, her hopelessness becomes hope. Her death becomes life and a future. Like our great old hymn, Amazing Grace, says, she once was lost, but now she's found. She didn't go and find God. God found her on this road, and he opened her eyes, showed her this well of water, and her faith is renewed in the promise that he had given her. She still has a long road to hoe, as we used to say. She is a type of single mother, and she's going to have to raise this boy herself. But she knows that she's not in it alone, that God is with her. And there's this great line, maybe the best verse in all of our scripture that we have today, and that is, God says to her, "Don't be afraid." This becomes a theme throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. We hear it again and again. It's a great verse. "Fear not, for I am with you." Psalm 40 says, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging." Psalms 118 says, "The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" 23rd Psalm, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Jesus in John 14 says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Old Testament prophet Isaiah, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." He tells Joshua when they go to take the promised land, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Deuteronomy, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." We're going to have a month of lessons from Jeremiah. Jeremiah wrote Lamentations 3 that says, "You came near to me when I called you, and you said to me, 'Do not fear.'" Psalm 56, "When I'm afraid, I put my trust in you, in God, whose word I praise. In God I trust, and I am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me?" Says again, Haggai, "This is what I covenanted with you when you came out of Egypt, and my spirit remains among you. Do not fear." Paul in 2 Timothy says, "For God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Jesus again said, "Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered, so don't be afraid. You're worth more than many sparrows." I think this is a great verse. In all of these verses, in different situations, they're fixing to go into battle. They're despairing, lost. The disciples are thinking Jesus is about to leave us, and we're going to be on our own in this. Every time, in every situation, we get this word: "Fear not, for I am with you," and it's a command. It's not a little suggestion. It's a command. Fear not. You have faith. Have faith. And why are we to not fear? Because God's with us. God is present. He is strong and willing and able and wants to help us, and He will give us the strength and assistance for whatever situation we find ourselves in. And He does this because He's love. He loves us. And consequently, He provides whatever protection we need, regardless of the circumstances. Well, as the writer of our student book literature points out, this is a scene that is played out not only for the Hebrews but also for the descendants of Ishmael. If Muslims who take a pilgrimage to Mecca now, part of that pilgrimage is going 7 times back and forth between these 2 low hills, and then finding this well, Zamzam, to recreate Hagar wandering back and forth, and God showing her this well. Interestingly, I talked about the tradition, the ancient history of the Jews. In the holy book of Islam, the Quran, Hagar's story is not told. But in the Hadith, which is the collection of the words of the Prophet Muhammad, she is seen to be the mother of the Arab tribe Adnani, I think is the way you pronounce it, which is the tribe that the Prophet Muhammad comes from. And so most of the story that we have and the reverence for her that the Arabs have comes in that way. Well, the 20th verse goes on. Let me finish up. It says, "And God was with the boy." That's another, great statement in the verses we have today. Reminds us that He's with the boy. Gives us some insight in the wideness of His grace. It says, "And He was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness. And he became a skillful archer, and he settled in the wilderness of Paran. And his mother arranged him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt." That would have ordinarily been the father's job to arrange the marriage, but here again, she's having to be both mother and father to this boy. And she goes and gets an Egyptian like herself, an Egyptian like Joseph's wife, who is the mother of 2 of the 12 tribes of Israel. For him. By way of closing, if you look at Sarah from the standpoint of these ancient Jewish rabbis, they see her as very spiritual and righteous. She's said to be spiritual, and they emphasize her ability to perceive and interact with divine messengers from God. And it demonstrates her spirituality and her ability to connect with God, proof of her connection to a belief in the one true God. And it shows her to be spiritual at a level that is beyond later generations in their analysis of it. So after Sarah's death at the age of 127 years, about 34 years after the events of our lesson today, it says that Abraham went and married Keturah. And I only mention this because it's interesting. It says Abraham goes and lives near Beersheba. And so there's a difference. There's sort of 2 schools of thought in this midrash. And one is that Keturah is actually Hagar. That's another name for Hagar. And so he has 6 more sons by Keturah, and we have their names. They become tribes of the desert as well, just as the 12 grandchildren of Ishmael become tribes of the desert, Arabs as we would think of them today, or Bedouins. And but there's some belief that they're one and the same. We don't know, and we don't really need to know.
I wonder what Ishmael and Isaac's relationships was when they were developed.
We don't.
There's a kind of a hint when we read about Abraham's death.
I know it's an interesting and really, I think, a kind of beautiful story. And we don't know, or wish we knew more about that. But what we've got is that it says, "And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived, 115 years, 175. Then Abraham gave up the ghost, and he died in a good old age, an old man and full of years. And he was gathered to his people. And his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah," which is where Sarah was buried. I think it's a fitting tribute of 2 sons who honor their father, and they do it together. And you'd like to think that whatever differences they had, there was reconciliation. there, and also an affirmation that both of them were living out the purpose that God had for each one individually. It says that Isaac inherited all that Abraham had, but that Abraham had given gifts to all of his sons during his life. So even though he didn't have the intimate relationship apparently that he had with Isaac, and it was only after Isaac was grown and married and was established as the tribal leader that he was, that he does this, but he does continue to have some relationship with all of these children. But he does ensure that they don't intermingle, that they separate. Now they do intermingle to a degree, because Isaac has twin sons, Isaac and Esau. Esau marries one of Ishmael's daughters, and they become Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites were the people who took Joseph from his brothers and on their behest sold him into slavery into Egypt. So we see them going through. One of the sons of Keturah is Midian. He becomes the head of a tribe also. Moses marries a Midianite. So there's continued to be some intermingling, but they live to the east and in the desert. I think it's interesting. The descendants of Abraham are almost uncountable. The descendants that he has today through Isaac are Jews. There are 15 million Jews in the world. Descendants of Ishmael are Arabs. There's about 500 million through Ishmael, and if you count all Muslims, it's about 2 billion. But those who are descendants who are reckoned righteous because of their faith, those who have the faith of Abraham and are children of Abraham through his descendant, Jesus of Nazareth, and their faith in him, are Christians. And there's about 2.5 billion Christians today. We hear in the news media about the Abraham Accord, its attempt to have peace in the Middle East. And I think that this is a good lesson that tells us and shows us that if there's going to be an accord between all of the people, the three great monotheistic religions of the world, if there's going to be an accord, if there's going to be peace among them, which we certainly don't see today and haven't down through history, it's going to be through those that have that faith in Jesus Christ that is reckoned as righteousness through him. Yeah, Charles.
Sorry, I hate to put this up again, but I'm still terribly confused about Ishmael's age.
Yeah.
Where are you saying that he's 16, 17 years old?
Well, Abraham was, when he was born, Abraham was 86. And then Isaac was born when he was 100. And he would have been weaned at 2 or 3 years. So you kind of add those up, and it comes that he's 16, 17 years old.
And the King James Version calls him the boy, not a infant.
It said on the day he stopped nursing Abraham, but there was huge man. It was
Isaac. Yeah, that's when Isaac was weaned. Right. When Isaac was weaned. So he would have been, 15, 16, 17 years old, depending on when he was weaned. Anything else? It's a great lesson. It's one to think about, try to apply to our current day and age.
I just thought that Hagar being so hopeless, that she would abandon her child to starvation because she didn't want to see it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big reminder of what's happening in Gaza today.
Yeah.
Mothers having to watch their children starve and wondering where it is in God's plan. When's he going to hear those cries of the boys and girls?
Right. And down through history, there have been, why does my child have this cancer, dying? Where is God? Where's God seeing this? Where's God hearing this? Or in Gaza or someplace else, in the desert. And that's what this lesson is for, to say, we may not understand it, may be beyond our comprehension, but God does hear, God does care, and does love. Ultimately provides. Anything else? Well, let's get out of here. I'm way